Hi, this is from my channel. If you've ever seen a planarian, you probably thought it looks kind of like a flatworm, right? You can tell that it's got a head and a tail and a sort of segmented body. But if you actually took a closer look at one of these things, you might have realized that it doesn't really have any distinct body parts. It's just this one giant blob of cells with a mouth on one end and an anus on the other. And while you could look at it and say that it has a head and a tail, that's more because it has a front and a back, like a North Pole and a South Pole. You could chop this thing into pieces, and as long as each piece has enough cells, it will simply reassemble itself back into a whole new planarian. This means that every cell in a planarian's body is essentially interchangeable with every other cell, which seems impossible when you think about human beings. I mean, we all know that your leg cells aren't going to turn into arm cells or eye cells or anything like that. There are some animals that can regrow lost limbs, but those are always going to be lower-order appendages. A lizard won't grow a new arm if it loses one, but it might grow a new toe if it loses one. And there are even some critters like starfish that can regrow entire arms. But even they don't make new bodies out of their arm cells, they just grow more arms. So it's pretty remarkable that planarians can take this seemingly impossible step of turning any of their cells into any other cell in their body. Now, since it's been observed for hundreds of years, scientists have known that planarians are capable of what's called complete or full-body regeneration, but how exactly they do this remained a mystery until recently. We didn't even know what type of stem cell, if any, was responsible. And without knowing what kind of stem cell is involved, we couldn't possibly figure out how it works. This meant that despite knowing about the amazing regenerative abilities of planarians for so long, we still had no idea how such a feat is accomplished. But in the last few years, researchers have finally gotten to the bottom of this, and they found that planarians owe their awesome regenerative abilities to something called totipotent stem cells. Totipotent stem cells are unique in that they can become any cell in the organism's body, not just different types of tissues like muscle cells or nervous tissue, but also extra embryonic tissues like bone and cartilage. This means that cells derived from totipotent stem cells can go on to develop into a complete new organism. In fact, the only difference between totipotent stem cells and embryonic stem cells is that totipotent stem cells can develop into extra embryonic tissues, whereas embryonic stem cells cannot. So in essence, totipotent stem cells are basically just embryonic stem cells on steroids, and totipotent stem cells are rare in adult animals. The only other example of them being present in an animal we know of is in the nematode C. elegans, but they're much more common in plants. One of the best studied examples is the common periwinkle, a type of flowering plant that has totipotent stem cells in its leaves. Now, obviously, it makes sense that a leaf cell could turn into a new leaf cell. That would be like a human skin cell becoming another skin cell, but a leaf cell turning into a flower cell is kind of like a human skin cell turning into an eye cell or a neuron. So clearly the stem cells in periwinkle leaves must be pluripotent or multipotent, right? Well, it turns out that these cells are actually totipotent. These cells can differentiate into any type of cell, not just leaf cells, flower cells, root cells, or any combination thereof. They can actually turn into any cell in the entire plant, including extra embryonic tissues, like the outer protective layer of seeds. Now, even though scientists knew that planarians had to tipotent stem cells, they didn't know this until 2016, when a team of researchers, led by a biologist at the University of California, Los Angeles, published a paper describing the discovery. In it, they describe how they used a fluorescent marker to track the development of planarian stem cells. And what they found was shocking. They found that unlike any other stem cell they'd ever looked at before, planarian stem cells were able to contribute to the development of extra embryonic tissues when given the chance. They wrote, This is the first example of adult neoblasts that exhibit totipotency. But while the discovery of totipotent stem cells did explain how planarians regenerate, it left researchers with more questions than answers. For example, if planarians have totipotent stem cells, why do they only use them for regeneration instead of, say, normal growth? After all, wouldn't it be easier to grow by using totipotent stem cells than by just mitosis? And if it's easier, why don't more animals do it? Well, this question remains unanswered. Another question that the discovery of totipotent stem cells brought up is, how do these cells keep their totipotency? I mean, if a planarian is born with totipotent stem cells, then why don't they lose their totipotency as the planarian ages? And if they do lose their totipotency, then how do they regain it when they get damaged? Well, in 2020, researchers made progress on answering that question too. In this study, they looked at the protein expression profiles of both young and old planarians. What they found was that the key protein responsible for maintaining totipotency is called nanos. Nanos is a type of RNA binding protein. That means that rather than interacting with DNA, it binds to RNA, and it does this in order to regulate gene expression. So if a certain gene needs to be turned off, nanos can bind to the RNA transcript of that gene and prevent it from being expressed. In this way, nanos acts as a sort of molecular switch that determines whether or not a cell will become totipotent. In the case of planarians, they found that young planarians have high levels of nanos, but older planarians have low levels. When they increased the levels of nanos in older planarians, they became more regenerative. This suggests that nanos plays a critical role in maintaining totipotency and therefore regeneration ability. So it seems that planarians are able to regenerate their entire bodies because they have totipotent stem cells, and these cells are maintained by high levels of nanos. But why do they have these cells in the first place? Well, this question remains unanswered, but it's an important one. Understanding why planarians and other animals have totipotent stem cells could lead to major advances in regenerative medicine. If we could find a way to make human cells totipotent, then we could potentially grow new organs and tissues from just a few cells. Imagine if you could donate just a handful of your own cells and then grow a new liver or a new heart from it. That would solve a lot of problems. But while scientists work on figuring out why planarians have totipotent stem cells, they've already been able to use what they know about planarians to make some pretty cool discoveries about stem cells. For example, by studying planarians, they've learned that stem cells can migrate throughout the body. This was a pretty shocking discovery because scientists had always assumed that stem cells were fixed in place. But this isn't the case in planarians. Their stem cells can move around freely. This means that the next time you see a planarian, keep in mind that those tiny little cells you can't see might be moving around inside that flat little worm.